If Labour wins, especially if it's with a sharply reduced majority, one of the big questions is, what next for Gordon Brown? Will he bide his time and wait for Tony Blair to step down, or will he feel he can go for the leadership much earlier? But it's not only the Labour Party that faces such questions. Tonight's results could also affect the way in which the Tories and the Liberal Democrats view their leaders. During the campaign, Labour asked voters, who do you want to run the country? Tony Blair or Michael Howard? But behind that question, there's another. How long will Tony Blair continue to run the country before he steps down for Gordon Brown? All the speculation that the Prime Minister was planning to remove his Chancellor has now vanished. After tonight, the question on everyone's lips will be how long Gordon Brown will be content to watch and wait before he makes his move. The Tories have their own leadership issues. Even if Michael Howard restores his party's fortunes after the catastrophes of his predecessors, can he really stay on? If so, the Tories would enter the next election with a 68-year-old leader. Then there's Charles Kennedy, still young but already a political veteran. Could he find himself now a power broker? Or might his party ask him to stand down before next time round? Now, let's talk about all that and much more with the former Labour leader, Lord Kinnock, who joins us from Chicago. Here in the studio, Michael Portillo, one-time Tory leadership contender, broadcaster and columnist as well, and the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Lord Steele. Michael Portillo first. It's a record result, but a much closer one than the Labour Party might have wished.
Yes, we normally measure swings by comparison with last time, but what other people are doing is they're measuring by comparison with expectations. And I think this is at the lower end of Labour's expectations. It may be at the higher end of Tory expectations. I mean, it is an amazing result for Labour. They've got 150 seats more than the Tories, if this is right. They've won by 66. This makes Tony Blair actually a bigger winner in aggregate than Margaret Thatcher. But nonetheless, on these results, I would have thought not Gordon Brown himself, but the Brown supporters will be wondering how quickly they can move Tony Blair out of Downing Street. Knowing that they've got quite a lot of people in the House who are potential rebels and certainly strongly supporting them and who don't particularly care for their present leader. That it will be possible, I think, to portray this result as disappointing and that the key factor in the campaign was that this time Tony Blair was not an electoral asset, he was becoming a liability. Well, I hope we'll be back with Neil Kinnock soon. We can't get him at the moment, but if we do, I'll put that exactly to him. Lord Steele, from the Liberal Democrat perspective, a long time ago, and you hate being reminded of it, so I won't do it. You said go home and prepare for government. But this is hardly the alternative party of power.
Always come out, don't they? Yes.
What do you make of the, given it's an exit poll, it doesn't show much movement, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, if it shows us 3% up, then that's the best result that the Liberal Democrats have had. I mean, it's certainly on the up. The question is how much on the up, and I don't actually place much confidence in the exit poll yet. I wouldn't bank on that.
Do you think that Kennedy had a... People have divided views about his campaign. First of all, he sort of screwed up on some of the statistics, but he also had a baby and showed that he was a human being.
Yes.
Do you think, though, some of the polls suggest, do you think that as leadership material, not of a party, but as someone who you say, this man can run the country, he just hasn't got it?
Well, that's been said of every Liberal and Liberal Democrat leader throughout every general election. There's nothing new. And
but they haven't run the country either. Well, they did. But did they say that about Asquith?
No, but I'm talking about it in recent times. I mean, I don't think from Joe Grimond onwards they've never said this man's going to run the country. And to be fair to Charles, he never actually said that himself, did he? I mean, it was a very well-tuned campaign, I thought. And I think he came across well. He actually had the highest ratings of the three party leaders.
Lord Kinnock, Neil Kinnock, thank you very much for joining us from Chicago. I don't know whether you heard that bit of the conversation that we were having, but one of the things that Michael Portillo was saying is, yes, this is a triumph if our exit poll is right for Labour. It would be a record in terms of the numbers of seats in 3 elections that already has overtaken Margaret Thatcher. However, he added, and I put it back to you, it's a disappointing result, and it will make all those around Brown who think he ought to have been leader a long time ago now push very hard for it. What's your response to that?
I don't think we'll get anything like that turmoil, but I understand why Michael Portillo, with his background, is saying it. I actually think that the majority will be slightly better than forecast by the exit poll. I think it'll be in the 80s. And the fact is, in a third successive election, to get what by any standards is a very substantial majority in the House of Commons is a token of the resilience of Labour under Tony Blair and indeed Gordon Brown, and is a secure majority, a very secure majority for the next 4 or 5 years.
Lord Kinnock, would you agree that it shows not only, even if it is a little bit better, we don't know quite where it's going to be, that this is hardly a vote of great affection and regard for the leader of the party, is it?
I don't take into account affection. I don't think that general elections are a time for sending Christmas or birthday cards. I think that what has happened is a reward to Labour for extremely good economic stewardship and strong support for the vital services, health and education particularly, mitigated by significant concern about the war in Iraq and its consequences, also some of its origins, and votes have been siphoned in crucial seats from Labour to the Liberal Democrats, with the net beneficiaries being the Conservatives. I think what you see is no significant increase in those seats in the Conservative share of the vote, but by holding their vote and by seeing the transfer of votes from Labour to the Liberal, the Conservatives will have derived some benefit.
Lord Kinnock, thank you very much for joining us, and to both Lord Steele and Michael Portillo briefly, we'll be back. Thank you. Now, you might have thought that whoever gets the most votes tonight wins. Actually, it's not necessarily so. For instance, it's quite possible for the Tories to have the largest share of the vote and still have many fewer MPs than Labour. And that's just one of the problems facing Michael Howard tonight. Here's Alistair.
Yes, Jonathan, each party has a number of electoral advantages and disadvantages. In fact, you could say it's rather like a game of snakes and ladders. The aim of the game is to land on that square, number 10 Downing Street. Some things, the ladders, help the party leaders on their journey. Others, the snakes, hold them up or knock them back. So let's start with the main challenger tonight, Michael Howard. Now, he begins the game in a bad position. He has just 165 seats. That's the smallest number of Conservative MPs since 1945, and mainly in rural areas and the leafy suburbs. Surely things can only get better, so let's take him up this short ladder and straight to Scotland and Wales. Again, virtually no-go areas for the Tories at the last election. Once again, they've surely got to do better this time. So, up Mr. Howard goes again to here, but there's trouble to come. It's urban Britain, a disaster area for the Conservatives last time. The Tories won just 18 inner-city seats in the whole of England in 2001. The problem is he needs to make gains everywhere to win the game. To climb that long ladder into Downing Street, he needs to be 11% ahead in the polls. And frankly, such a swing has never happened in modern Britain, and we don't think it happened today. So it remains a dream scenario. And there are nightmares ahead that are in the very fabric of our voting system. Say Labour and the Tories were neck and neck in the polls, Tony Blair would still get a majority of over 50 seats, sending Michael Howard down a snake. And worse still, even if the Tories were 5% ahead tonight, that would still leave Labour as the largest party and probably in power, which takes us back pretty well to where we began, as far away from number 10 as ever. Now we'll be playing Labour and Lib Dem snakes and ladders in just a moment, but for now, it's back to you, Jonathan.
So, the electoral system itself makes it very difficult for Michael Howard to make it into number 10, even if the Tories do win a really significant number of votes. One of the pressures his frontbench colleagues face, like Oliver Letwin, David Davis and Theresa May, they have to face the decapitation strategy of the Lib Dems. They were trying to destroy the leadership of the Conservative Party in the process. Nick, can Elvis help show us a little bit about what this means?
It absolutely can. Let's just remind you, Elvis, election visualiser. These blocks on the screen, they are, the higher they are, the larger the majority, the wider the area, trying to give you a proper picture rather than the distorted picture you get from a normal map of what's going on. Let's take David Davis's seat, Halton Price, up there in the northeast. That's where we begin this evening, a Tory lead of 4.3%. Wind the clock back, though, Jonathan, and look how the Liberal Democrats have been eroding his lead. Here we are the last time they won an election, all that blue across the northeast there in the north. His lead, a massive 34.1%. Tony Blair wins the election in 1997. Down it goes by a half to 15.2%. At the last election, where we are tonight in 2001, it falls to a third of that, 4.3%, showing how the Liberal Democrats have been eating away. Voters in that constituency know that the Liberal Democrats are the challenger. The question is, will Labour voters lend their votes to the Liberal Democrats tonight? The exit poll that we've got suggests maybe not, and they might be safe, but we'll see.
Let's see whether Colin Rallings can help us with this. How much do you regard the Tory big hitters to be at risk?
Well, they are obviously at risk, Jonathan, because the Liberal Democrats, more than any other party, you can't really treat as a uniform entity. What they do is they target particular constituencies. It may be that privately they've been looking at 2 or 3 of the so-called decapitation strategy victims, targeting them, hope to win those seats and will leave 1 or 2 of the others alone. You really can't take the exit polls suggesting that Conservatives are recovering against the Liberal Democrats to apply to every constituency where those 2 parties are going head-to-head. We could well see some well-known Conservatives go tonight. Equally, they could hang on.
Colin, thanks. In a moment, we'll be back at the party, but now we can go to the Shadow Education Secretary, Tim Collins, who is in his Westmoreland and Lonsdale constituency. Mr. Collins, if the exit poll is roughly right, your share of the vote has hardly shifted. You will have the same number of seats in Parliament, actually rather fewer seats in Parliament than Michael Foot had in the catastrophe of Labour's 1983 election. It's not much of a success story, is it?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, we do know that exit polls almost invariably are wrong, and they do normally underestimate the Conservative performance. But even just on your exit poll, you are predicting that the Conservative Party will have its largest number of gains since 1983, that will be the only party making a significant number of gains, that there'll be the smallest gap between the 2 major parties at any general election since 1974. And if Tony Blair were to get back on just 37% of the vote, it's not much of a mandate, is it? He's only, after 8 years of New Labour, taken Labour back to within a point or 2 of where it was in vote share when Neil Kinnock led them to defeat in 1992.
By the same token, can I ask you a question? Can you point to any point in history where the Conservatives have had a seriously dreadful consecutive run of defeats?
Well, the key point here, Jonathan, is that what we're seeing tonight is the revival of the Conservative Party. We're going to win bucket loads of seats up and down the country. I've been all around the 10 English regions. I've been visiting marginal seats throughout this campaign. Our candidates are absolutely confident that they're going to be winning in lots and lots of places. You're going to see some very surprising Labour people losing their seats way down the target list. We are confident we're doing well.
Are you very confident you're going to hold yours?
Yes, let me tell you about this tie I'm wearing. It's dates from 1910. It's been worn by
Looks like a Liberal Democrat
candidates.
tie to me.
Absolutely. Well, actually, it's the Lonsdale yellow, which is the traditional colour of the Conservative Party in these parts. It's been worn by Conservative candidates, this particular tie, in elections decades after decades. We've always won, and we're going to win here tonight, I can tell you very comfortably.
Tim Collins, thanks very much. Now, let's go back to Katie and Mark at the ITV Election party.
Jonathan, thank you, and I'm pleased to tell you we're joined by 2 ladies with very strong political views. Maureen Lipman, sorry to interrupt your conversation, and Germaine Greer. I'm sure you are. Let's just start with Maureen Lipman. Doesn't look that good early on for Labour. You voted Labour all your life. How are you feeling this evening?
Well, it's a very early days, Mark. I mean, I think we should wait and see a little while. I mean, I think better the devil you know than the devil you used to know. I'm still there with the Labour Party. I'll always vote Socialist. I do hope the Lib Dems put on a good show. Right. I think we both hope the Lib Dems will put on a good show.
Because you, of course, you support the Lib Dems, but you're very strong in the environment, don't you? And it didn't really figure in the campaign, did it, Germaine?
Because really it's not a matter of national politics, you know. It's a global thing. It's a thing about getting together, about centralising. Europe is a better prospect for the global environment question than England. But it's always struck me that the Lib Dems were more accessible to ideas about the environment than either Labour or the Tories.
Does it depress you, Maureen, that the 2 major parties are not focusing more on the environment?
Well, you don't win votes with the environment. That's the thing. One day you will, because if they tell us the truth, then we'll all vote Green.
Because you just said to me you'll vote Labour until the day you get really scared, and then you said you're close to being really scared.
Well,
what did you mean by that?
I'm scared about the environment. They're not telling us it like it is, and they should be discussing it. And they really must start to persuade what I can only describe as the President of the United States that really something has to change in that country so that it can change all over the world. I mean...
Right, well, let's just talk about Tony Blair for a second. What impact did Tony Blair have on this, in a sense of a negative impact, in the sense of the war in Iraq? Was there a problem for you?
Well, I don't think Tony Blair can get a word out about anything other than Iraq. He can't... They either ask him what is his relationship with Gordon Brown, or how many times he does it a night, or Iraq. So how can he ever discuss policies? I mean, the media have just been ridiculous.
And how big was the war in Iraq in this campaign for you?
It was an issue that I couldn't get over, because we fought an avoidable war against the civilian population. We could have been genuinely misled about the weapons of mass destruction, but anybody who follows my miserable career would know that I was saying from the very beginning that there was really no evidence. And it seemed to me during those 8 months lead up to the war that there was this insane momentum. But I wouldn't just blame Tony Blair for that. The media were hungry for war. They asked questions like, would you rule out the use of nuclear weapons? It was a kind of madness that possessed the whole nation. So I don't blame Blair for that too much.
Right, OK, I've got to stop you there because we've got to throw to Katie Derham, who is up in the London Eye, and will talk to us now. Katie.
Mark, thank you. Yes, joining me here to admire the views, I'm delighted to welcome Tony Benn and Clive Anderson. And we've been talking about the fact that Baroness Thatcher's going to cause rather a stir at the party down on the boat. So she was a giant, wasn't she, Tony, of the political scene? I mean, not perhaps one of your closest friends, but...
Well, she said what she meant what she said, and did what she said she'd do. I thought the policies were catastrophic, but at least there was a certain consistency about it, which better than you sometimes get. And from that point of view, you have to respect her. I did think she did enormous damage, apart from sacking all the miners when the price of coal is trebling now because of oil, and we're going to have to dig for coal again.
I feel you're fighting old battles here. I don't know.
Well, I don't know we are. We've got 1,000 years of coal under our territory.
Yes.
It's very, very valuable now. So anyway...
Bring back coal.
If Tony Blair, as expected, gets voted in again for a third term, will he match her on the sort of political pages of history, do you think?
Well, it isn't about individuals, is it? I mean, Churchill put it very well when he gave him a present on his 80th birthday, and somebody said, you were the lion that won the war. He said, the British people were the lion. I was privileged to give the roar. And I think much too much coverage is about individuals, truthfully. It's movements that make a difference.
What do you think, Clive? Too much roaring going on in this election campaign?
I think Tony Blair, if he wins this election, it looks like he might, I think he should just go for it. He should introduce the poll tax. And so you can produce all these policies, you can fight wars with the Republican presidents, he can, you know, the balance between rich and poor can be in favour of the rich, as it turns out, and get on well with big business. Just see if he can get away with it. Just see if he can go. Because if a Conservative Prime Minister had fought the Iraq War on the basis that it was fought, there'd be blood in the streets now. But he's fantastic. He can get away. Bring in the poll tax just to show that he could do it.
Just
the way Margaret Thatcher couldn't get away with it. What do you think?
Well, she was asked her greatest achievement, and she did say New Labour. Yes. And that I think that in 1997 the people wanted to change, but the British establishment didn't want to change, and therefore they thought it was safer.
The people wanted New Labour, and you're happy with that, clearly.
Well, I'm not nothing to do with it. He said,
gentlemen, we're going to have to continue this lively discussion down with a glass of champagne in the boat, which I'm not sad about. But
I think you've missed a trick. Why can't you use this eye as a swingometer, a giant swingometer with blue and red and yellow?
There's a thought. Jonathan, I'll leave it to you to tell Alistair that the whole setup's changed with the swingometers.
Of course, thank you very much indeed. But I think Tony only has tea. Anyway, coming up on the programme, the results will soon begin to pour in, and we'll be bringing them fastest and first with all the shocks and surprises that we expect. But first, let's have a reminder of the story of the night so far. Here it comes. There we have, we're predicting Labour to win with a majority of 66 on our exit poll, but we're saying there's going to be lots of ups and downs. And here is our prediction: 356 seats for Labour, the winning post at 324, Tories on 209, Liberal Democrats 53, and 28 the rest, the Nationalists and the other small parties. And John Prescott has said, what's clear and has been all the time, Labour's going to be the next government. bet he put it more robustly than that in private. And Liam Fox has said, it's always been an enormous mountain for us to climb. Michael Howard has led the party up that mountain with great gusto. And Mingus Campbell said, it's in the target seats we've been going like a bomb, and there's a great deal of confidence. Now, a little piece of news in which actually is very significant if it turns out to be the case. The independent Peter Law, who was a Labour Party, had the seat of Blaenau Gwent last time round. They had an all-woman shortlist, which meant that he stood down, wasn't allowed to run, and he ran as an independent. It is suggested, reports coming in, that he's probably won that seat. Meanwhile, David Hill, who's the senior press officer for the Labour Party, has said marginals will be lost, but Labour will win a third term, and he said, Labour voters, I quote, I think, Labour voters have drifted away. Anyway, a little while ago, we were talking about decapitation, the Lib Dem strategy of targeting top Tories in marginal seats. If it works, then one or two or even more Conservative big beasts would find themselves enduring what might be called the Michael Portillo experience. You'll remember it, that moment when he was humiliated in Labour's 1997 landslide, a defeat which spawned the question and even a book called Were You Still Up for Portillo? Well, he's still up and with us here again. Hi.
Hello again.
Nice to see you, Michael. But you've made a short film for us. It reminisces about that lowest point. Let's have a look at it now.
In the 1997 election, when the Tories were swept out of power, the most spectacular defeat of the whole evening was mine. And it happened here at this leisure centre called Pickett's Lock. That defeat, my defeat in 1997, was later voted one of the most memorable television moments, I think, of all time.
Look at Michael Portillo's face. That is not the face of a confident man. And I can see the pain in your eyes.
Portillo, Michael, Denzel, Xavier. Thank you, members. Conservative Party, 19,137. Twig, Stephen, Labour Party, 20,500.
So, look at Michael Portillo's face. He puts a brave smile on it, but Michael Portillo, for the moment, is out of British politics. He is defeated in Enfield Southgate, the most astonishing result.
Hi, Stephen. How are you? Even though we've now been together in Parliament for years, this is the first time we've talked about that night at Pickett's Lock that changed both our lives. Now, I hardly saw it that night because, you know, it was pitch dark.
Yeah.
It's way outside the constituency anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. I get lost around here whenever I come up here.
And I was, in any case, preoccupied because, you know, I knew the result. I don't know whether you did by then, but...
I got here a lot earlier than you.
Yes.
So I didn't know when I got here. It was only when it all started that it...
Well, I knew I'd stayed in the Conservative headquarters until I had reports back, you know, that the piles of papers were looking all wrong. So I pretty well knew the result when I arrived. But I remember when I did arrive, I saw you, and you looked shell-shocked.
I did,
You looked really... I mean, your face was sort of haggard. And I think I said to you something like, cheer up, Steve, it's not that bad, or something like that.
What you said to me was, you must be devastated.
Apart from Stephen and me, the third role in that great TV moment was played by the man who read out the result, the then Mayor of Enfield, Pat Caneen. Big hits on the small screen.
That's it, 100 TV most memorable moments.
And what number? I'm number 3, I'm afraid.
You're number 3, indeed you are, yes. We all knew what it was. I mean, when I originally said, well, these are the figures I'm going to declare, is everybody happy? You just looked at me and said, oh, yes, ecstatically so, you know. I have to say it was a very statesmanlike performance by you, particularly when you made your little speech at the end.
A truly terrible night for the Conservatives. I would have wished to have been part of rebuilding it inside the House of Commons. I can't now do that. I wanted to defy expectations by being a good loser, but cheering Labour supporters still regarded me as public enemy number 1. I came here to Buckingham Palace the morning after the election because a minister who's lost his job, by tradition, says goodbye to the Queen. My last trip in the ministerial limousine. Was my defeat a personal tragedy? Not at all. I'd had a wonderful career, and now I was to discover that there's a great life to be had outside politics.
Not a personal tragedy. I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment, Michael.
Sure.
But someone who you know extremely well has arrived at our party on the river. We can see someone who is absolutely unforgettable, a major force in the story of the Conservative Party, and we expect or hope to be talking to her very soon. Michael, back to this extraordinary moment that wasn't a personal tragedy. Come off it.
No, really, because that evening, remember, the Conservative Party had been reduced to 165 seats. So we weren't going to go on being in government. In fact, we were going to endure a very miserable time in opposition. I would have been...
You only enjoy power.
Well, I must say I enjoyed office more than anything else. I'll be absolutely frank about that. And there was going to be this business of a leadership election. I would probably have had to be a candidate. I think it would have been a rather bitter struggle. So actually, even that evening, I could see the consolations crowding in.
One of the curiosities that people will have noticed, that there you were, almost arm in arm with a man who decapitated you. But I said, well, he's meant to be a big enemy. What are they doing, cozying up like this?
Well, I always wanted to get on well with any candidate who was standing against me, and I did get on very well with Stephen. But in any case, of course, the Labour Party is the Conservative Party's enemy in the big picture. You know, once every 4 years, we are competing for power. But in between that, all the competition is between people in the same party. Who's up, who's down, who's going to get the good job. So actually, it's much easier in between elections to have good relations with the other party than sometimes with your own.
And very briefly, you lost the limo, but outside you're doing so well, you've got another one to substitute for, is that right?
No, I take the tube. I'll get out my London Underground oyster, if you like, and show you.
Meanwhile, Gerald, I think I recognise that person. Can you describe us to it?
We artists feel we ought to immortalise these great moments that we hear about. And this is Michael's decapitation, and I think it's also time for a bit of blood at this point in the evening. There's the first blood of the evening.
I think that's how it must have really felt, Mr. Portillo.
Well, no, as I said, I was focused too on trying to be dignified, and I did see those consolations. So no, it's a true story.
We'll pause there. We've just had the declaration in Sunderland North, and we will see that right now. To be winning there. We will get that result as soon as we've turned it around a bit more efficiently. And meanwhile, just on that, because I'm sure it'll come up in a second, Lord Steele, just very briefly with you, do you think he was telling it exactly as it must have felt?
I happened to be with Michael that night. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do.
In a certain other television studio
on another channel.
with another Dimbleby. And we were talking, and you went off to your account, and I don't think at that point you thought you'd lost.
No, I did actually.
Did you?
I was amazed.
Well, in that case, you disguised it very well.
I was amazed that Jeremy Paxton, if we're allowed to mention him on this channel,
yeah, I think
didn't
so,
say to me,
definitely not.
Why?
And I've got to ask you to pause in any case. Raw reminiscence later, now back to the present. Some big questions that face the Liberal Democrats. After some pretty big successes in recent by-elections, they clearly hope for spectacular successes tonight. Indeed, Charles Kennedy likes to boast this party could replace the Conservatives as the real opposition. But is that actually possible? Let's go back to Alistair Stewart's Snakes and Ladders for the answers.
Thanks, Jonathan. So what are these snakes and ladders in our electoral system for the Liberal Democrats? Well, starting with the positives, Charles Kennedy led the Lib Dems to what was, in their terms, a fantastic result at the last election. It was one of their best results in a century, bagging 52 seats. So up the ladder he goes. Charles Kennedy's a man with momentum, and he's made real progress since 2001. In the last Parliament, the Lib Dems were the by-election champs, picking up 2 more seats where the Conservatives made no ground. Add to that a defection from Labour, and the Lib Dems were sitting pretty on 55 seats when this election was called. Now, many commentators say that Charles Kennedy threw a 6 when he opposed the war in Iraq from the outset. It even gained him the support of a former Labour MP during the campaign. And he didn't struggle to maintain a clear line on the issue, as Michael Howard did. So, here he sits. His party's looking in a strong position, even if sleepless nights did cause just a few campaign wobbles. But the truth is, number 10 is as far away as ever. The best he could hope for would be to be invited in for talks as a power broker in a hung parliament. And that's when the snakes start rustling in the election undergrowth. Taking votes from Labour could in some circumstances be the nightmare scenario, winning not enough votes to gain the seat, but doing just enough to weaken Labour and let the Conservatives slip through the middle. What's more, the Liberal Democrats are simply spread too thin. Their support isn't concentrated in the cities like Labour or in the countryside like the Conservatives. And that's why, as long as there's a first-past-the-post system, the Liberal Democrats will always struggle, sending them sliding back to the beginning of the board. Now, later on, we'll be looking at Labour's game plans, but for now, it's back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Alistair. In a moment, we're going to be joined by the Liberal Democrat, President Simon Hughes, but we can look now at Kirkcaldy, which is where Gordon Brown is arriving for his county. He will be safely back in Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. No very great surprise there, but we'll be looking at the change. We do know that Labour, incidentally, has won Sunderland North, and we'll bring you the full result as soon as we can. Meanwhile, just picking up, Nick, on the Liberal Democrat challenge that we were seeing there, can you give us a sense of it before we talk to Simon Hughes?
Well, I think what's so fascinating about tonight is that the exit poll shows a big boost for the Liberal Democrat in terms of vote, but not a big boost in seats. In fact, it suggests they may be down a little bit. That will be an important part of the story of the night.
Gordon Brown, of course, is the man of this campaign. Many people said that he was reluctant to fight in the campaign and had to be persuaded. He has, in any case, been anointed, without much doubt, as the next leader after being the man who came with Tony Blair to ensure the Labour victory. Now, let's get another quick roundup of the election night news from Mary Nightingale. Mary.
Thanks very much indeed, Jonathan. In the last few minutes, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott has said there was no doubt Labour would be returned for an historic third term in office. He was speaking after Labour won the first seat to declare tonight, Sunderland South, with a reduced majority. Speaking from Chicago, the former Labour leader, Neil Kinnock, also predicted a good night overall.
The fact is, in a third successive election, to get what by any standards is a very substantial majority in the House of Commons is a token of the resilience of Labour under Tony Blair and indeed Gordon Brown.
The Labour MP Claire Short has claimed a majority as low as 66 could actually be good for the government. Arriving at her count in Birmingham, the former Cabinet Minister said the result might mean a little more discussion and respect for Parliament. And she said the party would have done better with a different leader. For the Conservatives, the party co-chairman Liam Fox has acknowledged they may have a mountain to climb. However, some of his colleagues, including frontbencher Tim Collins, are more hopeful.
Our candidates are absolutely confident that they're going to be winning in lots and lots of places. You're going to see some very surprising Labour people losing their seats way down the target list. We are confident we're doing well.
For their part, the Liberal Democrats are insisting they will make significant gains despite the exit poll prediction. Deputy Leader Mingus Campbell says they've improved their share of the vote and will end up with more seats.
We are 3% up from what we were in the last election. Labour are several points down. The Tories are exactly the same, exactly the level that prompted Mr Hague to resign within a matter of 24 hours.
And finally, one of the most anticipated results is shaping up to be in Bethnal Green and Bow. There, the Labour MP, Una King, is facing a tough challenge from George Galloway, who's standing for the anti-war Respect Party. The count is bound to be controversial. Allegations have already been made about postal ballot fraud. And that's about it. I'll have another update a little later. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mary. And now we go back and see that Gordon Brown is getting close to his count. Nick, Gordon Brown, we were talking about his achievement. There is Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, which is where he'll be waiting to hear almost certainly. It's a new seat. It's a notional victory for him because of the boundary changes in Scotland. But his performance in this election, the way in which he came to the rescue, as it were, of Tony Blair?
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary, wasn't it? And I think the one thing that people will remember from this election is the moment that he embraced Tony Blair. Remember that he had simply refused to have conversations about the election. He had said, effectively, to Tony Blair, you want it down in Melbourne to run it? Well, fine, he can run it. I've got other things to do. And then to see them, as we did, hug each other, as it were, in public, appear on election broadcast together in every news conference. I will never forget when the Prime Minister was on the back foot on Iraq, Gordon Brown offering himself, in effect, as a human shield. Now, if this majority is towards the low end and not up towards the high end, it's no doubt at all what Michael Portillo was saying earlier, that supporters, not Gordon Brown himself, will say, now, come on, we're not going to win again unless we get a change of leader quite soon.
You're sounding as if you don't think they're absolute buddies, but it's a calculated marriage of convenience.
Perish the thought. What a thought.
What a thought. I'll put it now to Ruth Kelly, who's joined us from Bolton West. Ruth Kelly, we've just been seeing up in Scotland, and we've been talking about Gordon Brown as he goes to his count. You're waiting for yours as well. What do you make of the projection of 66-seat majority, which we said might go down, of course, could also go up?
It could also go up, it could go down. I mean, an exit poll is an exit poll, and it's far too early to say what will actually happen when the votes are counted. It does look likely, however, that Labour will win a historic third term. And I think that that is a real vote of confidence in our programme since 1997, the investment in schools, the investment in hospitals that we've seen, and actually the British public saying they want that investment to continue.
It's mainly Gordon Brown's achievement, isn't it, against the resentment that there is both inside the Labour Party and outside against Tony Blair, fair or unfair though that may be.
The last 8 years has all been Gordon Brown, I don't think. So it's been Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and the rest of the Cabinet and the Labour government working together to deliver record investment in schools, record investment in hospitals. And of course at the centre of our campaign has been the strength of the economy. Because to have an economy that has seen its longest period of growth for 300 years is quite a phenomenon. And I think it was absolutely right to have the economy centre stage. And in the end, when people thought about the fact that 2 million jobs have been created since 1997,
how long?
Then they really voted on that basis.
How long do you think now Tony Blair will wish to stay as Prime Minister before deciding that he's reached the end of his term?
Well, it's a little premature to speculate on the future Labour leadership when the votes aren't yet counted. But if we are right and that we have seen a substantial Labour majority and that we have secured our historic third term, Tony Blair has made it absolutely clear that he wants to serve a full term.
OK, Ruth Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now we can show you that full result at Sunderland North. Let's have a look at it. Here it is. Labour hold with a majority of 9,995. Bill Etherington, 15,719 for Labour. The Conservatives in second place, 5,724. The swing there, Liberal Democrats on 4,277. The swing from Labour to Conservative, 5.1%. Interesting figure, that, 5.1%. The share of the vote for Labour, 54.4. Conservatives, 19.8. Now let's look at that change in the share of the vote. This is our second seat in, of course, this evening. Down 8.3 to Labour, up 1.9 to the Conservatives, up 2.7 to the Liberals. Liberal Democrats, Independents on 2. I want to bring in Colin Rallings on that. Colin, what are we to make of that?
Well, Jonathan, it tells us that the voters of Sunderland have swung away from Labour, but funnily enough, I've just heard the result from the third Sunderland seat, Houghton and Washington East. And there again, there's been a movement away from Labour, but this time to the Liberal Democrats. So the pattern that we were sort of expecting at the beginning of the evening, that Liberal Democrats would benefit from this disaffection with Labour, has been true in one Sunderland seat, not the other true. It simply underlines that we really don't know what's going to happen tonight. If seats in the same city are behaving differently, goodness knows what's going to happen across the country.
Colin, I think that's extraordinary. It goes back to this thing. Insofar as it's Iraq or immigration or whatever, the votes are going away from Labour, but in ways that are totally unpredictable.
That's right. Look at those little graphs that you put up, and the red and the green and the yellow were basically even, weren't they? People were deciding quite large numbers to abandon Labour, admittedly in a safe seat where they knew they'd still end up with a Labour MP, but they were splitting between Tories, Liberal Democrats and the rest. And it may be in different parts of the country people are searching around for the right way to kick this government.
It is going to be an extremely riveting evening. But to demonstrate that on ITV's Election 2005, we do seek to deliver on our promises, let's go to the boat on the river opposite Parliament and the best political party tonight, where I think, Mark, you're with a wonderful entertainer called Nicholas Parsons.
I am with a wonderful entertainer called Nicholas Parsons. I'm also with Tony Robinson, a Labour Party member, of course. Let's start with Tony Robinson. I mean, not a great night at the moment, is it?
Yes, I'm glad that the Tories haven't done a breakthrough, because I thought that their campaign was horrible. I'm glad that it looks like the Labour Party are going to win, but also...
a majority of 66, you can't be happy with that,
Well, no,
can you?
I am in a funny sort of way, because I think that the electorate have said they don't like the way Number 10 conducts itself, and I think that really the Labour government are going to have a major, serious rethink of what its relationship is with its own party, with its own politicians, and with the country now.
So you think it's about the style of government of Tony Blair?
Well, I think it's deeper than that. I think it's about how democratic the practice of our politics should be. And it's got to be more so because that's what the people want, and they've said it terribly clearly.
And where does this leave the Tony Blair-Gordon Brown issue, do you think?
Well, he's already said that he's going to leave, and I think the only issue is when. But what worries me is I wouldn't want some seamless passing on. I think we need a debate within the party about how the Labour Party and how the Labour government is going to run in future.
But it's slightly disingenuous. He said he's going to serve a full term. If you stand, you serve a full term. That's where he stands.
Well, yes, but people are already saying yes, but he would have to go after 3 years in order to give the new person a fair crack at the whip. Yes. But that means you split your entire term. Yes. So it would be like Iraq. It would be dominated just by one thing. My guess is that we'll see him leave pretty quickly.
Okay, Nicholas Parsons.
Yes.
What do you make of it, the results so far, the exit polls so far?
Well, the exit polls are predicting that there's going to be a reduced majority for Labour and an increased number of seats for the Liberals, which is wonderful because I've been supporting the Liberal Party ever since my university days, and to see them grow from a party that had 5 or 6 seats and then 50 or 60 seats, and now we're going to get more. I mean, we're on a surge, we're moving forward. I think people are recognising that the whole idea that a Liberal vote was a wasted vote was a horrendous thing to say. We need a third party to put forward a fair, intelligent, middle-of-the-road point of view.
And right, do you think of Charles Kennedy to make the stand on Iraq that he made?
Absolutely. I mean, I was all against the war. It was a ridiculous thing to do. First of all, it was wrong. It was wrong. They went to war on misrepresentation to Parliament and everywhere. But on top of that, the consequences were bound to be catastrophic, which they are. It's proved right. And the Liberals were the only ones who came out and said, "Don't we vote against this?" They were against the war, 100%. And I think they've been proved absolutely right.
Okay, Nicholas Parsons, Tony Robertson, thanks very much indeed. Jonathan, back to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Now to the final instalment of Alistair Stewart's electoral snakes and ladders. This time he's looking at how the system gives Labour so many built-in advantages.
Thanks, Jonathan. The prize for Labour in this game of snakes and ladders is keeping hold of number 10. Tony Blair and his party start with a massive advantage. The very structure of our electoral system is biased in their favour, and we've called it the X factor. Labour have the right number of votes exactly where it needs them to win the maximum number of seats. So much so that from the very outset they're almost there and within striking distance of number 10. But there are quite a few snakes that have crept into the political undergrowth since the last election, and perhaps the most venomous of those is distrust in the leader himself. Polling suggests that to many voters, Tony Blair's become arrogant and removed, particularly over the Iraq war. Well, that doesn't go down well with Labour supporters or the floating voters who flocked to him in 1997 and 2001, so that might dent him tonight. And then there are the women. In 1997, for the first time, more voted Labour than Tory, and that helped Tony Blair into government. But, you know, they seem to have gone off him as well and might just give him a bloody nose tonight. Finally, there's that Blair-Brown feud. A split party is never popular with the voters, but in truth, it's just a short snake, because the idea of vote Blair, get Brown may have actually stopped the slide. But what would be really damaging would be if traditional Labour supporters stayed at home today, or even voted Liberal Democrat. Failure to get the vote out in Labour heartland seats would cause Mr Blair real problems. And that's why this campaign was no walk in the park. But do you remember where we started? Tony Blair never forgot the X factor. Even if he were neck and neck with the Tories, he still wins with a massive majority. Even if he were 5% behind the Tories, he still wins with a comfortable majority. And that's why he'll almost certainly be back here tonight in Downing Street for a record-breaking third term. So Mr Blair is the player in the best position to win tonight's game.
Alistair, no doubt about that, but an extremely intriguing night. I'm joined now by David Blunkett, the former Home Secretary. Good evening, Mr Blunkett.
Good evening, Jonathan.
3 results that we've got in so far in the same area. The 2 Sunderlands and Houghton and Washington East show very considerable swings away from Labour, 5, 6, 7% away from Labour, and they go practically evenly, so far as we can tell, to the Lib Dems and to the Tories. How do you explain that draining of votes?
Well, firstly, I think the Linton-Crosby approach
with focus groups having reinforced their view, was to tackle the white working class vote on immigration, and they've been reasonably successful. This is not surprising. I predicted 3 years ago, which is why I put the programme in place, that this would be the kind of issue that they'd focus on. Secondly, there is obviously a major campaign that's been run against Tony Blair personally, and that has had an impact. Remembering that it's not just the way in which the Liberal Democrats have behaved, that there was a conscious decision by those who support the Tory party in the media that Tony would be the focus, because he was the major gain for Labour in 1997 and 2001.
You said in the last few days of this campaign that it would be self-indulgent of those Labour supporters who were opposed to the war in Iraq, or indeed believed that Michael Howard was right in saying that they'd been lied to about Iraq, self-indulgent to leave Labour. Wasn't that a tad arrogant on your part to say that?
No, it was a simple fact. I said the better off who chose to leave Labour in circumstances where their change could result in a Tory being elected, which I think we'll see later tonight will come true, was self-indulgence, because they, i.e. those who are better off, tomorrow morning, Friday morning, their lives won't have changed. In my constituency, the lives of my electorate will change had there been a Tory government. Now, there's not going to be one, and the Tories are going to end up roughly with the number of seats that Labour had in 1983.
Just in a phrase, just in a phrase, a slightly gloomy night.
Well, I think when you're losing good colleagues, when people who have slugged their guts out and have done a good job in Parliament lose their seats, your heart goes out to them. If you've had two absolutely avalanche victories in 97, 2001, it's not surprising that you're losing seats. I think tomorrow we'll be putting a government, the Prime Minister will be putting a government together that will listen to, will respond to what has happened in the general election, and will build a relationship with the people. And that's the really important thing that actually will stand us in good stead over the next 5 years.
And you'll be in that government?
That's entirely in the hands of the Prime Minister. I've done
He's
my
already
best
said you're
over the
going to
last
be in
few-
it. He's already said you're going to be in it.
I've done my best over the last few weeks with very good colleagues in government to actually ensure that we got the message across. I think, regrettably, in this general election, not just Iraq, but primarily Iraq, has drowned out many of the debates that we should have been having between us and the electorate. And we need to renew that, not by rerunning the election, and I hope tonight on this channel and on others we won't simply continue to try and rerun the election, but in a vision of the future. We'll have a dialogue with the electorate in a way which will restore confidence and faith in politics and politicians.
David Blunkey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, just to remind you, down there you can see Labour 4, Conservatives 0, 0, 0 for Liberal Democrats and the others as well. That is our tally. That is the number of seats that are in so far. We've had 4 in so far, and is the implication of those, of course, I was talking about with David Blunkett. Now, it's time to link up with the ITV newsrooms around the United Kingdom for more on what's happening where you are tonight. Join us again in just a couple of minutes.
Good evening, I'm Jonathan Wills, concentrating on election results here in London. A quick reminder then of what's up for grabs. This was the political map of London before polling day. 74 seats in all, 54 held by Labour, 13 by the Conservatives and 7 by the Liberal Democrats. Well, how will that change over the next few hours, we're going to ask. We're still awaiting the first result from in and around the capital. Bethnal Green and Bow, counting underway there, held by Labour's Una King in 2001, with a majority of more than 10,000. But she was facing a hefty challenge from George Galloway and his Respect Party. Well, we're watching Orpington in Kent as well, won by the Conservatives at the last election with the slender majority of just 269 votes. The Tories' John Horam is doing his best to fend off the Lib Dems, who had it firmly in their sights this time round, said in fact to be number 2 on their list of target seats. Well, his opponent from the Lib Dems is Chris Mains, and this is the 4th time he's fought John Horam for Orpington. Another result to watch out for then, Bexley Heath and Crayford Crayford, a definite marginal held by Labour with a majority of less than 1,500. The MP there, Nigel Beard, enjoyed a visit early on in the campaign from the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. Well, what effect has that had, we wonder? His Conservative opponent is David Evannett. He's the only Tory MP who lost in 1997 and is still trying to win back the same seat, though because of boundary changes, previously he only represented Crayford. Now, Brent East is a hugely significant indicator of party fortunes. It was Ken Livingstone-Patch when he was an MP, so firmly Labour territory then, but Labour surrendered it to Sarah Tether, the Liberal Democrat, in a by-election in September 2003. She had a majority then of just over 1,100 votes. I'm back with an update in 2 hours' time when we'll have the results showing how the parties are faring here in the capital. Now, though, back to ITV's coverage.
Hello again. Now we're joined by Simon Hughes for the Liberal Democrats. He's president of the Liberal Democrats and doesn't yet know whether he's in, but it hopes he's going to be in. Mr. Hughes, whether you're in or not in, it's a pretty gloomy night on the basis of the evidence of the exit poll. We keep stressing it is an exit poll, and there have been, in the safe seats that have been called, there have been some draining from Labour, both to the Conservatives and to yourselves. But the proposal of the exit poll is you're going to have roughly the same amount of seats in the next House of Commons.
I think hello, good evening, firstly, from a fine, if windy London. The exit polls give us a percentage share over the country. If they're true, forget anything else, they give us our best score, our best share of the vote since the party was formed in 1988. They give the Tories 1% more, and that's 1% more than their two worst results since 1832, and they bring Labour down, interestingly, to the share of the vote they got in the only two times in the last century when they had a minority government, 37%. So we would have, if we get a Labour majority, but with this share of the vote, they would have lost their authority in terms of who voted for them, barely 1 in 3 of the population. The Tories wouldn't have moved, and we would have gone up 3 or 4%. So there's not a huge movement, except Labour dropping a lot. Well, in terms of the seats, I mean, I know no more than you. There have been 4 seats in. They've shown the movement away from Labour. I think the battleground, as you've said all evening so far, will be in the marginal seats. A lot of the country will have a general shift, but the marginal seats will show very different outcomes. And I mean, even if I could, I wouldn't wish to predict what they'll be, because I've been to many of them and I know that they feel different in different places. And does that feeling that you get from those suggest that our prediction for you may be too low? Yes. Or do you sense that it's also the case that quite a lot of seats that are Conservative marginals, held by Conservatives, that you would take, given the strength of the shift to the Conservatives, means they're going to hold on to many more of those than you might have hoped? I'll give you my honest judgment. My honest judgment is that the Tory core voters held, and so there is a much tighter contest in the Tory Liberal Democrat marginals, either where we're defending against the Conservatives or they're defending against us, than there is in the seats we're challenging Labour in. The problem for us is that the seats we're challenging Labour in, there's a bigger gap for most of them between where we are and where we need to go, but the votes have been crumbling. I was up the road in Islington, the actual seat where Granita, the famous restaurant, was, and where Mr Blair had his last house before moving into Downing Street. I would be very surprised if that seat doesn't come to us over the next few hours. And I've been to Bristol, there's a seat which I think will come to us. Okay. I've been to Birmingham. So I think there were 2 different sorts of activities. Labour Lib Dem contest doing one thing, Tory Lib Dem contest being much tighter. Simon Hughes, thanks for joining us. We shall, as you said, we shall see. The count is going on in Sedgefield South. It's Sedgefield South in Sedgefield, and we will be there for Tony Blair's seat. He will certainly get in, but again, the share of the vote that he gets will be very interesting. Now, though, a reminder of what's happened so far tonight. Let's see what it is. Here we have Labour to win with a majority of 66. This is still based on our exit poll. So far, 5 seats in. And 356 to Labour, we're still predicting. 324 is the finishing post, 209 for the Conservatives and 53 for the Liberal Democrats. And Ruth Kelly said on this programme it does look likely that Labour will win an historic 3rd term. Tony Blair has made it absolutely clear he will serve a full term, which doesn't actually answer the question. But anyway, Sunderland South, this is the first result we had in. Majority of 11,059. Chris Mullin in with 17,982. But the swing there from Labour to Conservative, 3.9%.
And Labour holds Sunderland South as well, with 15,719 votes versus the Conservatives 5,724 and Liberal Democrats 4,277. The swing there from Labour to Conservative larger, 5.1%. And Houghton and Washington East, all up in the same area of the country, Labour held with a majority of 16,000, just over 16,000, and the swing there from Liberal not to Conservative, no, not to Conservative, but to Liberal Democrat of 7.2%, which just illustrates what we've been saying from the very beginning, that there was going to be a huge number of things happening this evening. Now we can join, I think, Juliet Bremner. Yes. You're in Bethnal Green and Bow. Juliet,
yes, I am.
It's been, we're told, a pretty ugly campaign. What's it like now?
Well, there's a lot of tension in the hall tonight. As you rightly say, it has been an acrimonious battle here between Una King for the Labour Party and George Galloway, who, of course, was expelled from the Labour Party and now has his Respect anti-war party. There was a lot of mudslinging when they were on the campaign trail. Some people said it looked more like a boxing match than an election campaign. And here tonight, although neither of the two main protagonists have turned up yet, we see their scrutineers, their supporters are out in force in the hall, and what they're doing is they're checking all those votes, because both parties say that it is just too close to call here. Now, if George Galloway was able to unseat Una King, it would be a tremendous blow. She had a majority of 10,000 last time, so if he's really tapped into the Muslim Bangladeshi voters and persuaded them, because of their anti-war feelings, that they should vote for him in a sufficient number to unseat one of Mr. Blair's most loyal supporters, it will indeed be a blow for the Labour Party.
Julie, that's very interesting, and it's right, isn't it? During the campaign, it was extraordinarily difficult to find out how it was going to go, because people were simply not communicating what they were intending to do.
And that is still the case here tonight. We're hearing different things, as you might expect, from each party. We're being told by George Galloway's supporters that they think they've done very well, particularly in the Spitalfields area, which is a heavy Bangladesh area. But Una King's group say they think they've done well in the white areas, in the white working class areas. They think they've held their own there. But neither one wants to call this just yet.
Very interesting, Julia. Thank you very much. We will, of course, be back for that count, but neck and neck in Bethnal Green and Bow. Now, the master of them all, Gerald Scarfe, has been working away. Gerald.
Well, we were talking about Gordon Brown a little earlier, and I started drawing this. Here's Brown and Blair walking along in the same suit. And they're saying, both of them are saying, thank God this Unity Cape is nearly over.
And it's a very large suit, and it's no doubt who's got the biggest suit.
Well, yes, that's true, yes. Although Blair's getting rather large as well, isn't he?
Eating a lot during the...
Yeah.
Although they did have that picture on his torso, saying the best torso in somewhere or other, in some magazine.
I bring you news on this. Apparently, the reason the Prime Minister put on weight during the campaign is not just because we all do this during the campaign, but he actually fell off his running track, so he can't do the exercise he normally does.
I want to bring in who's joined us now, and warm welcome to you, Roy Hattersley, Lord Hattersley. Gerald Scarfe's cartoon there shows a very uncomfortable relationship. How do you see it?
I think it's a very complicated relationship. There was a time when they were genuinely very close. When Tony Blair worked for me, 10, 12 years ago, he and Gordon were inseparable, and genuinely inseparable. And Gordon was the senior partner. That's one of the strange paradoxes of this. Gordon was very much in charge, and Tony Blair was running 2 paces behind him, which I think leads to some of the understandable resentment. I think the warmth has disappeared, but they're both sensible enough to know that the future of the Labour Party in government depends on them working together, which they can do perfectly satisfactorily. But I don't think they would want to go on holiday together anymore.
What do you make of what we know so far? We know it's very early, but we have seen real swings away from Labour. To what do you attribute that?
I think the Prime Minister, to put it brutally frankly, has been a great liability. Had Gordon Brown led the party into this election, I think we would just be saying quite different things. We'd have been saying it's not only been a boring campaign, well, not a boring campaign, a rather squalid campaign. We'd have said it's a very boring night because we know there's going to be a very large Labour majority. And I think his problem has not simply been Iraq, though history will say, he will say on behalf of history, that it was Iraq that went wrong. I think people increasingly don't like his style of government. And I think that's become very obvious in the seats, the Labour seats, where there's going to be a swing against the Labour Party from traditional Labour voters.
And given the potential reduction in the size of the majority down to whatever it may be, 66, does that put Gordon Brown in an even stronger position with power ebbing from Tony Blair?
I think it's inconceivable that the Prime Minister will last for the length of full Parliament. He had to say that. There's some things Prime Ministers have to say. You have to say you're not going to devalue the pound. You have to say you're going to settle for a full term. So I don't blame him for saying that. But if the majority is perhaps slightly more than 66, who might deny Neil Kinnock his moment? He said he's going to be 80. I always agree with what Neil Kinnock says. Say it's a majority of 80. I think that means that the pressure on the Prime Minister to go, whether he wants to go or not, the pressure will become irresistible.
Nick, it's an extraordinary conversation in a way we're having, isn't it? A third huge victory for Labour this would be it 66 or 80 or even higher if it turned out to be, after a situation in which he thought he was going to resign after the war, and we're talking about whether it could change, but it's all to do with expectations. Now, if I can just take you through to my toy Elvis, just to give you a sense of how Labour's losing its support in its key areas, because Roy Hattersley is quite right that this conversation will be had. I don't doubt him for a second, but it is interesting to see. Look at Houghton and Washington East, one of the seats that was in, an important seat because it's run by Fraser Kemp, who was number 2 to Alan Milburn, running this campaign. There is the result. Remember, the height of this red block, the skyscraper, tells you the size of the majority. Just compare the result just in with where we were, 2001 at the beginning of the night, 58.9%, much higher that block. When Tony Blair first got elected in 97, higher still, 63.5%. So it's a safe seat, it's a huge majority for Fraser Kemp, but it's been going down. But what will be interesting is, does the map become more blue? Does that suggest the Tories have got a chance? Or is it that just Labour feel the heat a little bit at the moment because their majorities are falling and they use that as an excuse to say to Tony Blair, thanks very much, but we don't need you to stay that full term?
It's not me that set this benchmark. I would have been delighted to see a majority of 50. I was in the Cabinet for 2 years when we didn't have a majority at all. You can manage on 20 very easily. It's Tony Blair and Blairites who've said we must have a huge majority to vindicate Blairism. Not a Labour victory, but a Blair victory. They've made the benchmark, and by making the benchmark, they've set it up.